Recently, after 2 years of interviewing for machine learning and applied scientist roles, I finally received an offer. But because of visa complications and issues, I still don't know if I'll actually be able to start working. About a year ago, I made a video about getting laid off twice and going through kind of the struggles of unemployment. Since then, I've spent countless hours just grinding through and preparing for these interviews. And after so many of them, I started noticing some patterns, especially on how much more selective and subjective the entire process has become. And by the way, this is just based on my own experiences, and your experiences might kind of be different based on where you come from and your background and things like that. One thing I noticed is that the interview process has become much more selective, but not necessarily harder in a technical sense. The questions that I actually faced didn't really change dramatically in terms of difficulty compared to a few years ago. The bigger difference is that there are just now far more qualified candidates competing for the same roles. And so even getting these interviews in the first place became much, much harder. And there were even periods where I was literally applying for the jobs daily, but still got literally like 0 callbacks for several weeks in a row. And the biggest change for me was even passing all the interviews doesn't guarantee an offer anymore. And so this happened to me twice. Both times I went through the entire process from recruiter screens, take-home assignments, technical rounds, and these like final rounds where you kind of, go through these multiple interviews over several hours. And both times I was verbally told that they wanted to move forward. And I remember discussing even details like compensation and relocation details, things like when I could actually start. And then both offers just disappeared. One company, they said they stopped hiring. The other said they went with someone more experienced. And for me, at least, that was the toughest part of this whole process. Because just realizing that even after clearing all these interview rounds, there's no guarantee of actually receiving an offer. For the interviews themselves, I also noticed there's way lower tolerance for mistakes now. And back when I got my Amazon offer in 2021, I remember that I definitely didn't ace every round and likely struggled with at least 1 or 2 questions. And compared to back then, I actually think my interview skills has kind of substantially improved. But most of my interviews still didn't convert to even a verbal offer. And I remember I was even rejected once for receiving too many hints on a coding round. And finally, no matter how well you perform in interviews, I feel like having the right domain experience matters much more now. And one hiring manager even told me directly that while my technical background was pretty strong, he wanted someone with actual production experience in the exact domain of this role. And so, although I didn't move forward back then, honestly, I kind of appreciated his honesty because at least back then I couldn't understand exactly what they were looking for. The other big thing I noticed is that interviewing is incredibly subjective. I mean, this has probably always been true to some extent, but it seems to be even more relevant now, given that how competitive the job market has become. 2 people with very similar skills can interview for the same role and still end up with completely different outcomes, depending on factors that are outside their control. Things like timing. Timing matters, hiring needs change, and ultimately, interviewers are themselves human beings with their own backgrounds and preferences. For example, I once had an interviewer who joined late to my interview and just spent several minutes just quietly reading my resume, going over it, and then questioning, even whether some of the metrics and accomplishments I listed in my resume even made sense. And that was likely because our backgrounds were completely different. And so honestly, the conversation just never really clicked. And so obviously I didn't pass it around. And over time, I noticed that interviews generally went much more smoother if there was a kind of a stronger overlap between my background and the interviewer's background. But however, I also want to emphasize that this randomness, this subjectivity can also work in your favor. So I have another interviewer once who came from a very similar background as me. He openly said that I'll be a very good fit for this role. And he ended up giving me one of the easiest coding questions that I've seen during my interviews, and I passed it around very easily. I also learned that because the process is so subjective, it helps to be much more proactive and visible. So you don't have to mass spam recruiters or hiring managers, but genuinely reaching out for roles that align closely with your interests and background and experiences can make a real difference now and can compound over time. So if interviewing is partly a numbers game, then giving yourself much more chances to benefit from that randomness is really important. In fact, the actual written offer I got came out of one of those reach outs. A lot of them got ignored, but it was more than worth it in my case because I was invited to interview after the hiring manager thankfully noticed my profile. Honestly speaking, I don't think I did any better in those interviews compared to some places that rejected me. But that's exactly why I think this whole process can be so unpredictable and subjective. So I finally have a written offer, but I still can't start yet. Visa processing for people outside the US has recently gotten much more restrictive and tough. And right now, there's no guarantee that my visa case will actually get approved. But I guess that's sort of the point, because a lot of this process is just outside your control. But whatever the outcome, I'll keep going. Hopefully this video was helpful or at least interesting. If you've been through something similar or have any questions, let me know in the comments below.